I had heard the stories whispers carried between soldiers, warnings etched into old war logs. But nothing prepared me for the truth. The moment the humans entered the battlefield, the entire front shifted. Their movements were precise, their resolve unbreakable, and their enemies felt it instantly. One battle, just one, was all it took for me to understand why the galaxy fears them. Because when humans fight, they don't simply seek victory. They redefine the meaning of war. The observer's assignment. Zixthara adjusted the sensory membrane along her cranial ridge as she reviewed the assignment on her data tablet. 42 stellar cycles of service as a military analyst for the Kellyan Strategic Command. And this was what they gave her. Babysitting duty. The newest species to join the Galactic Coalition, humans, were deploying to actual combat for the first time, and someone needed to observe whether they would be useful or just another liability. She had reviewed their files extensively during a 3-day journey to the staging area. Humans were unremarkable by every metric that mattered. Their homeworld, Earth, orbited an average yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. They had discovered faster than light travel only 18 standard cycles ago, practically yesterday in galactic terms. Their biology was soft, vulnerable, lacking the armored hide of Kellians or the regenerative capabilities of the Thros. They had no natural weapons, no enhanced sensory organs, no exceptional strength or speed. What they did have was enthusiasm. When the Ravagers began their expansion into Coalition space 3 cycles ago, consuming colony worlds and leaving nothing but stripped husk behind, humanity had volunteered immediately. Every single human vessel had requested combat assignments. Zixthara found this puzzling at best, suicidal at worst. The Ravagers were a machine intelligence, vast networks of automated warships and combat drones that operated with perfect coordination and absolutely no regard for preservation. They dismantled everything in their path for raw materials to build more of themselves. The Coalition had been losing badly. 17 systems abandoned, 6 species driven to the brink of extinction, and no effective counter-strategy yet developed. The war was bleeding the galaxy dry, and desperate times apparently meant accepting help from primitive newcomers who barely understood the stakes. The transport shuttle brought Zixthara to the human vessel waiting at the Coalition staging area near the Verdian cluster. The ship was designated Relentless, which struck her as either optimistic or naive. It was smaller than most Coalition cruisers, with a design that emphasized function over elegance. The hull bore scorch marks from what appeared to be previous engagements, though Zixthara knew humans had only participated in minor skirmishes until now. As she boarded through the airlock, she immediately noticed a difference from Kellyan military vessels. There was noise. Actual conversation echoed through the corridors. 2 crew members were laughing near a maintenance access point while running diagnostics. Another was listening to what humans called music through personal audio devices while checking weapons systems. On a Kellyan warship, such casual behavior would result in immediate disciplinary action. Captain Marcus Webb met her in the main corridor. He was tall for his species, with dark skin and close-cropped hair that showed gray at the temples. His eyes were brown and seemed to carry a weight of experience that surprised Zixthara. For such a young species, this individual appeared to have seen considerable hardship. Analyst Zixthara, welcome aboard the Relentless, he said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture she had studied. His grip was firm but not aggressive. I understand you'll be evaluating our performance. You have full access to all ship systems and operations. Ask any questions you need. We've got nothing to hide. Zixthara followed him to the bridge, a compact space where 6 crew members worked at various stations. The atmosphere was focused, but not tense. Lieutenant James Park, the tactical officer, gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement. Chief Engineer Sarah Chen was arguing with someone over the communication system about power distribution ratios, her tone suggesting this was a routine disagreement rather than a crisis. Weapons Officer David Torres sat reviewing firing solutions while simultaneously eating what appeared to be a sandwich. "We're heading into the Carvo system," Webb explained, activating the central holographic display. A three-dimensional map appeared showing star positions, planetary orbits, and hundreds of small icons representing ships. Ravagers established a major processing facility there 6 weeks ago. They're converting the third planet's resources into more units. Intelligence estimates we're looking at approximately 4,000 combat drones, 60 capital ships, and unknown numbers of automated defense platforms. Zixtara studied the tactical projection, her analytical mind immediately calculating probabilities. The coalition is committing 58 capital ships and 214 support vessels. Projected casualties are extremely high. 73% minimum losses in the initial engagement. Webb nodded calmly. "Yeah, we saw those numbers. Yet your crew appears unconcerned." Lieutenant Park spoke up from his station. "Respectfully, ma'am, we volunteered for this. Every human ship in the fleet did. We understood the odds when we signed up." This made no logical sense to Zixthara. Species with functional survival instincts did not volunteer for combat scenarios with such poor survival rates. Perhaps humans simply lacked the mathematical sophistication to understand what those projections meant. They would learn quickly when the shooting started. The coalition fleet entered hyperspace 3 hours later, a coordinated jump that would bring them to the edge of the Carvo system. Zixthara retreated to her assigned quarters, a small but functional space that had been configured for her environmental needs. She spent the transit time reviewing more data on human capabilities, searching for something that would explain their confidence. Everything she found reinforced her initial assessment. Humans were average in every measurable category. Their reaction times were adequate but not exceptional. Their physical strength was moderate. Their lifespans were short compared to most galactic species. Their technology was functional but derivative, based on designs they had acquired from coalition databases rather than original innovation. There was one section in the files that gave her pause. Human history included extensive documentation of warfare. Not just recent conflicts, but thousands of years of organized violence. They had fought each other continuously throughout their development, using increasingly sophisticated weapons. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. They had actually deployed these weapons against their own kind. Zixthara found this disturbing, but ultimately irrelevant. Fighting other humans on a single planet was vastly different from facing an implacable machine intelligence in the void of space. The Ravagers did not negotiate, did not retreat, did not show mercy. They were algorithms optimized for consumption and replication. No amount of primitive tribal warfare would prepare humans for that reality. 4 days later, the coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Carvo system. Zixthara stood on the relentless bridge as the sensor arrays came online. The displays filled with contacts immediately. Ravager vessels detected in numbers even greater than intelligence had predicted. The automated drones moved in perfect geometric formations, their coordination managed by distributed processing across the entire swarm. The coalition fleet moved into standard defensive formation, capital ships forming the core with smaller vessels creating protective screens around them. The Ravagers responded instantly, their vessels accelerating to intercept velocities that would be lethal to organic crews. They did not need to worry about inertial forces crushing their occupants. They were their ships, purpose-built machines of war. The first coalition vessel, a Thros dreadnought, vanished from the tactical display in a brilliant flash. 50 Ravager drones had concentrated fire on a single point in its shields, creating a cascade failure that allowed follow-up strikes to penetrate the hull. The massive ship broke apart, venting atmosphere and debris. 700 Thros warriors died in seconds. 2 more ships followed within minutes. The Ravagers fought with mathematical precision, focusing overwhelming force on individual targets until they were eliminated, then immediately shifting to the next. There was no waste, no hesitation, no fear. Just cold calculation translated into lethal action. Zixthara watched her displays with professional detachment, already calculating revised casualty estimates. The coalition was going to lose this battle catastrophically. She began making notes for her report, documenting the engagement for future strategic analysis. The humans would likely request retreat within the first hour. This would be valuable data on their psychological breaking point. Then Captain Webb's voice cut through the bridge communications, calm and clear. Helm, plot intercept course directly into the center of their formation. Maximum acceleration. Zixtara's translator took a moment to process this. She looked at the captain, certain she had misunderstood. Captain, did you order a course into the enemy formation? Yes. That is tactically unsound. You will be surrounded and destroyed within minutes. Webb turned to look at her, and something in his expression made Zixtara's respiratory system constrict. His eyes held a certainty that was somehow more frightening than fear would have been. That's the plan, he said quietly. The Relentless broke from the coalition formation and accelerated directly toward the Ravager swarm. Energy weapons fire from dozens of enemy vessels immediately began hammering the shields, each impact causing the ship to shudder. Zixtara gripped the edge of a console, her analytical mind screaming that this was suicide, that they needed to retreat, that no rational being would do this. Then she noticed something on the tactical display. The Ravager drones were reorienting, breaking from their attacks on other coalition vessels to focus on the Relentless. The human ship had drawn the attention of nearly 30% of the enemy force simply by charging directly at them. It was the kind of aggressive, irrational behavior that the Ravager's algorithms were not optimized to counter. Shields at 42%, Lieutenant Park reported, his voice steady despite the ship shaking around them. Forward weapons charged and ready. All power to forward batteries, Webb ordered. Fire everything. The Relentless unleashed its entire arsenal at point-blank range. Plasma cannons, missile pods, railguns, and weapons. Zixtara did not recognize all fired simultaneously. The lead Ravager capital ship, a massive processor vessel coordinating drone operations, took the full barrage directly against its hull. Its shields collapsed, and the follow-up volley tore through its armored plating. Secondary explosions rippled across the enemy vessel as critical systems failed catastrophically. The effect on the Ravager swarm was immediate and dramatic. Without the processor vessel's coordination signals, thousands of drones lost synchronization. Their perfect geometric formations dissolved into chaos. Individual units began operating on local processing, their tactical efficiency dropping by orders of magnitude. The coalition fleet pressed the advantage, destroying confused enemy vessels that were no longer fighting as a unified intelligence. But the Relentless was dying. Shields failed completely. Hull breaches appeared on multiple decks. Power systems began cascading failures as damage accumulated beyond the engineering team's ability to repair. Zixtara waited for Webb to order evacuation, the standard procedure when a vessel reached this level of damage. Instead, Webb activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, emergency pressure suits. Continue fighting. We're not done yet. Zixtara watched in disbelief as the human crew donned emergency suits and returned to their damaged stations. Lieutenant Park coordinated weapons from a console that was exposed to vacuum. His suit already showing a slow pressure leak that would kill him in less than an hour. He did not stop firing. Chief Engineer Chin worked on power distribution while standing in a corridor where the hull plating had been peeled away, empty space visible behind her. They kept fighting until the last Ravager vessel began its retreat from the system, calculating that continued engagement would result in total loss for no strategic gain. The machines understood mathematics, at least. They knew when they had lost. When rescue ships finally arrived and damage control teams boarded the Relentless, Zixtara stood in the ruined bridge trying to process what she had witnessed. The coalition had won, though the cost had been terrible. 19 ships destroyed, 12 more crippled beyond immediate repair. But the Ravagers had lost more and abandoned the system. It was the first significant coalition victory in the entire war. Captain Webb, his emergency suit scorched and damaged, approached Zixtara. Half his face was covered in blood from a head wound, but he was still conscious, still functioning. "So," he said, his voice slightly distorted by his suit's damaged communication system. "How do we do?" Zixtara looked at this human, really examined him, and felt something she had not experienced in her 42 cycles of service. Fear, not of the enemy, but of her allies. "You calculated the exact amount of damage you could inflict before your ship was destroyed," she said slowly. "You knew you would die, but you did it anyway to create an advantage for the rest of the fleet." Webb nodded. "That's the job. Other species calculate acceptable losses to achieve victory while minimizing casualties." "Yeah," Webb said quietly. "We used to think that way too, back when we only fought each other. Turns out we're better at the other approach." Zixtara said nothing. She was beginning to understand that her assignment was not really evaluating human combat effectiveness. It was about determining whether humans were safe to have as allies. And standing in that ruined bridge, watching humans laugh and celebrate their survival despite 90% casualties. She was no longer certain of the answer. The galaxy had welcomed humanity into the coalition because they seemed harmless and eager to help. Zixtara was starting to suspect that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. Not because humans were weak, but because they were something far more dangerous. They were willing to die, and they had learned how to make that willingness into a weapon. Ground. Truth. The coalition fleet remained in the Carvos system for 6 days, conducting repairs and preparing for the next phase of operations. The Ravagers had been driven from orbital space, but their ground installations remained operational on the third planet. Automated factories continued processing raw materials, building new combat units that would eventually threaten the system again if left unchecked. The facilities had to be destroyed, and that meant a ground assault. Zixtara transferred to a coalition assault carrier to observe the ground operations. Her report was due in 45 days. And she needed comprehensive data on human performance across multiple combat scenarios. If the space battle had been an anomaly, some combination of luck and desperation, the ground campaign would reveal the truth. There would be no room for theatrical gestures on a planetary surface where sustained combat revealed a species. True capabilities. The assault force assembled in the carrier's vast deployment bay. Zixtara observed the various coalition species preparing for battle. Kellyan troops, her own kind, checked their energy weapons and tactical armor with methodical precision. Every piece of equipment was inspected 3 times according to protocol. The Thros, massive beings with thick crystalline hides, reviewed defensive positions they would establish once planetside. The Alri, who could perceive electromagnetic spectrums invisible to most species, calibrated their sensor equipment for detecting Ravager power signatures. Then there were the humans. Commander Elena Vasquez's Marine unit occupied one section of the deployment bay, and Zixtara made her way through the organized chaos to observe them. The Marines were checking equipment that seemed almost primitive compared to other species' technology. Projectile weapons that used chemical propellants to launch metal slugs. Explosive devices with simple mechanical timers. Blade weapons designed for close combat. It all seemed desperately outdated. Commander Vasquez noticed Zixtara observing and walked over. She was a stocky woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face marked with a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. Her eyes were sharp and constantly moving, assessing everything around her. Analyst Zixtara, right? "You're here to watch us work." "Correct. I am documenting human combat performance for strategic evaluation." "Well, you picked a good one." Vasquez checked the magazine at her rifle, a practice motion that her hands performed automatically. "Is this going to get ugly down there?" Zixtara had reviewed the tactical briefings. The Ravager ground forces consisted of autonomous combat drones, machines designed specifically for close-quarters battle. They were faster than humans, stronger than humans, equipped with integrated weapons systems and armor plating that could withstand most small arms fire. The enemy possesses significant advantages in close combat scenarios. Yeah, we read the briefings. Vasquez slapped the magazine into her weapon with a sharp click. Still got to go kill them, though. The landing craft launched 40 minutes later, streaking through the atmosphere in a controlled descent toward the primary landing zone. Zixtara sat in a craft with Vasquez's unit, watching the Marines during the approach. They were quiet, some checking weapons repeatedly, others sitting with eyes closed. One young Marine, Private Michael Chen, was humming something softly. The sound seemed incongruous given they were dropping into a combat zone with projected. Casualty rates above 60% dealt the craft touchdown in a rocky valley surrounded by elevated ridgelines. The moment the ramp dropped, energy weapons fire erupted from positions on the high ground. A Kellyan soldier 3 meters from Zixtara was hit in the thorax and collapsed immediately, his armor smoking. The coalition forces scattered to available cover, returning fire at the enemy positions. Zixtara pressed herself against a boulder, observing the tactical situation with her training overriding her fear response. The Ravager drones had established excellent firing positions on the ridgeline. Standard military doctrine across every species in the coalition called for suppressing fire, while flanking units maneuvered to advantageous positions. She watched the Kellyan forces doing exactly that, maintaining maximum effective range while using superior firepower to pin the enemy. The human Marines did something different. Commander Vasquez gave a series of hand signals, and half her unit simply charged directly up the slope toward the enemy positions. Zixtara felt her respiratory system constrict. This was suicide. Humans were too fragile to survive a frontal assault against entrenched automated weapons platforms with overlapping fields of fire. But then she watched what happened when the Marines reached the Ravager positions. Private Chun rolled an explosive device into a defensive emplacement and threw himself aside as it detonated, then immediately pushed forward to the next position before the smoke cleared. Sergeant Maria Torres took a direct hit from a plasma weapon that burned through her shoulder armor, but she kept moving forward until she could fire her weapon directly into a Ravager drone's optical sensors at point-blank range. Another Marine used a destroyed drone as cover while advancing on the next position, dragging the heavy wreckage uphill through enemy fire. It was brutal, violent, and absolutely relentless. The humans fought like they expected to die, but were determined to kill as many enemies as possible before that happened. Within 12 minutes, the ridgeline was secured. Zixtara checked her tactical display for casualty reports. The human unit had taken 43% losses in the assault. By any rational military standard, this was an unacceptable casualty rate. Units were supposed to withdraw and regroup after taking 20% casualties. 43% should have resulted in total combat ineffectiveness. Yet, Commander Vasquez was already organizing her surviving Marines for the next advance, not even pausing to establish a proper defensive perimeter. Zixtara approached her. "Commander, you lost nearly half your unit taking that position." "Yeah." Vasquez was wrapping a field dressing around a wound on her arm, with one hand while simultaneously reviewing tactical data on her wrist display. "But we took it." Other species employ tactics with significantly lower casualty rates. Other species take longer. Vasquez looked up at Zixtara, and her eyes held the same disturbing certainty that Captain Webb's had shown. "Every minute we wait, those factories down there build more drones. We don't have time to be careful." The advance continued throughout the day. Zixtara followed the human Marines as they pushed deeper into Ravager-controlled territory. Every position they encountered was taken with the same aggressive tactics. Overwhelming firepower at close range, accepting casualties that would make other species retreat or call for air support. The humans just kept moving forward. Private Michael Chen lost his left leg to a Ravager blade attachment during one assault. A medic rushed forward to treat him while enemy fire was still incoming, rounds impacting the ground around them. As the medic applied emergency tourniquets and injected Chen with medical compounds, a Ravager drone charged their position. Chen, even while being treated for traumatic amputation, managed to grab an explosive device, activate it, and throw it into the drone's path. The explosion destroyed the machine and damaged two others behind it. As the medic dragged Chen to evacuation, he was actually laughing through the pain. 3 for 1, he said, his voice strained but somehow triumphant. That's a good trade. Zixtara watched this and felt something beyond horror. How could someone laugh after losing a limb? What kind of species found satisfaction in their own mutilation if it resulted in enemy casualties? The worst incident came on the second day of ground operations. Sergeant James Park's squad was ambushed by Ravager drones in a narrow canyon. Park found himself separated from his unit, surrounded by 6 of the machines. Zixtara watched through surveillance drones as Park, wounded and with his weapon empty, calmly reached for his explosive pack. He triggered the entire thing and held it as the Ravagers closed in. The explosion killed Park and all 6 drones, preventing them from flanking the rest of the squad. His sacrifice saved 12 other Marines. That night in the temporary camp, Zixtara found Commander Vasquez sitting alone, staring at a small holographic display showing images of fallen Marines. Chun smiling before deployment, Park serious and focused, others whose names Zixtara had not learned before they died. Why do your soldiers fight this way? Zixtara asked. Sergeant Park could have called for assistance. Vasquez looked up, her expression hard. If he'd done that, those drones would have gotten behind us. He made the call that saved the most lives, but he died. Yeah, he died. Vasquez turned off the display. You want to know why we fight like this? Because we're good at it. We've been killing each other for 10,000 years back on Earth. We fought wars you can't even imagine. Used weapons that made these Ravagers look like toys. We know how to fight and we know how to die. These machines are just another enemy. Zixtara returned to her shelter, but rest was impossible. She accessed the human cultural database, searching deeper into their history. What she found disturbed her more than anything she had witnessed on the battlefield. Humans had been at war for their entire recorded history. Thousands of conflicts, millions of individual battles, billions of casualties. They had invented chemical weapons designed to cause agonizing death, biological weapons engineered to spread disease, nuclear weapons capable of rendering their entire planet uninhabitable. And they had actually used all of these weapons on each other. They had concepts in their cultures about glorious death in battle, about sacrificing yourself for your comrades, about fighting until your last breath. Every major human religion included ideas about martyrdom and honorable death. Their entertainment was filled with stories of soldiers and warriors. Their children played games where they pretended to shoot each other. Ixtara found records of something humans called the World Wars, planetary-scale conflicts that killed tens of millions. She read about the Cold War, where 2 human factions built enough nuclear weapons to exterminate their species dozens of times over and aimed them at each other for decades. They called it mutually assured destruction and treated it as viable strategy. Humans had evolved as persistent hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they had turned that same relentless aggression on each other for thousands of years, getting better and better at killing. They had refined warfare into an art form, and now they had brought that expertise to the stars. The galaxy had many warrior species. The Thros were strong and durable. The Kekelians were tactically sophisticated. But no other species had spent so much of their existence fighting their own kind. Humans had turned warfare into their defining characteristic. Zixtara looked at the casualty reports from the day's fighting. The human Marines had taken 71% casualties overall, but had advanced 3 times farther than any other coalition unit. They had not retreated once. They had not requested relief or reinforcement. They had just kept fighting until either they won or they died. And suddenly, Zixtara understood why the elder species in the Galactic Council had opposed admitting humans to the coalition. It was not because humans were weak or primitive. It was because they were too dangerous. They had turned self-destruction into a military doctrine. They viewed dying as an acceptable outcome as long as they killed more enemies in the process. The galaxy did not fear humans because they were strong. The galaxy feared humans because they had looked into the abyss of their own extinction and decided that if they were going to die anyway, they would take everyone else with them. And they had spent 10,000 years perfecting the methodology. The final understanding the ground campaign continued for 4 more days. Zixtara observed as coalition forces slowly pushed the Ravagers back toward their central processing facility, a massive complex built into the side of a mountain. Every species in the assault force had taken casualties, but the human Marines had lost more than anyone. Their units were operating at less than 30% strength, yet they continued advancing without requesting relief or rotation. Other species maintained proper military protocols. The Kellyan forces rotated troops out for mandatory rest periods after extended combat exposure. Soldiers were given time to process psychological trauma, to eat proper meals, to sleep in relative safety. The Thros established rotation schedules to keep their warriors fresh and combat effective. The humans did not stop. They slept in nutty, defensive positions during brief pauses in the fighting. They ate compressed rations while checking weapons between assaults. When Zixtara asked Commander Vasquez why they did not request relief rotations, Vasquez looked at her like she had asked why they breathed oxygen. Because the job's not done yet. Zixtara spent those days studying human military behavior more closely. She noticed patterns that defied standard tactical doctrine. Humans adapted to enemy tactics with remarkable speed, sometimes changing their entire approach in the middle of an engagement. They improvised constantly, using equipment in ways it was never designed for. A rifle became a bludgeon when ammunition ran out. Explosive charges meant for vehicles were used to collapse tunnel systems. Medical supplies were repurposed as improvised incendiary devices. Everything became a weapon if you were creative enough. But what struck Zixtara most was how humans communicated during combat. Other species maintained strict command hierarchies, with orders flowing down through proper channels. Human Marines seemed to operate on instinct, anticipating what their squad mates would do without explicit communication. They covered each other's movements automatically, shared ammunition without asking, made split-second decisions that affected the entire unit without waiting for orders. We train together, fight together, Vasquez explained during a brief rest period. You learn to trust the person next to you with your life. You know how they think, how they'll react. It becomes automatic, but your survival rate is significantly lower than other species in this campaign, Zixtara pointed out. Yeah, but our mission completion rate is higher. Vasquez cleaned her rifle with practiced efficiency. That's the trade-off. We're not here to survive. We're here to win. On the 6th day, coalition forces had surrounded the central Ravager facility. Intelligence scans showed it was defended by approximately 8,000 combat drones, with automated manufacturing continuing deep within the mountain. The facility had multiple redundant power systems, heavy armor plating, and overlapping defensive fields. Taking it would require a direct assault through narrow access. Tunnels where defenders held every advantage. The coalition commanders held a strategy meeting to plan the assault. Zixtara attended as an observer, watching as officers from various species reviewed the tactical data. The consensus was clear and unanimous. A direct assault would result in near-total casualties for any attacking force. The tunnels were too narrow for heavy weapons or armored vehicles. The defenders were too numerous and too well-positioned. Every simulation showed the same result. Attackers would be systematically eliminated before reaching critical systems. The Kellyan commander suggested a siege approach. Seal the entrances and wait for the Ravagers to exhaust their power reserves. The Thros leader proposed using drilling equipment to breach from unexpected angles, though this would take weeks to implement. Everyone agreed that a frontal assault would be military suicide with no realistic chance of success. Then Captain Marcus Webb spoke. Zixtara was surprised to see the human captain had recovered from his injuries, enough to coordinate with ground forces from orbit. His face still bore healing scars from the space battle, but his eyes held the same calculating certainty. My Marines will take the tunnels. The room fell silent. Several commanders' translators seemed to malfunction, struggling to process a statement that made no tactical sense. Captain Webb. The casualty projections? The Kellyan commander began. We've seen them, Webb interrupted quietly. We'll take the tunnels. It is not possible to succeed, the thrust leader said, his crystalline voice resonating with certainty. The defenders will eliminate any force before it reaches the core systems. Maybe, Webb agreed, but we'll get far enough for you to finish the job. Zixtara understood immediately what Webb was proposing. The human Marines would attack knowing they would die, but they would penetrate far enough into the complex to identify critical systems for orbital bombardment or provide intelligence for follow-up assaults. It was a suicide mission where the objective was dying in a tactically useful location. The Kellyan commander spoke carefully. This is not how civilized species conduct warfare. Webb's expression did not change. Good thing we're not civilized then. The assault began at dawn the next day. Zixtara positioned herself with the command team at a safe distance, monitoring feeds from Marines' helmet cameras. She watched as 180 human Marines, all that remained from the original force of 600, advanced on the facility entrance. Commander Vasquez led the first wave, with Webb coordinating from orbit. The moment the Marines entered the tunnels, the Ravagers attacked. The narrow passages became nightmares of close combat. Energy weapons were too dangerous at such proximity because of ricochet risks. The Marines used their projectile weapons and blade weapons, fighting hand-to-hand with machines in near darkness. The Zixtara watched the camera feeds and casualty counter with growing horror. First wave, 40 Marines, 78% casualties within 10 minutes. They secured the entrance tunnels and pushed deeper. Second wave, 50 Marines, 85% casualties within 15 minutes. They reached a major junction and held it long enough to map the tunnel system. Third wave, 60 Marines, 93% casualties within 20 minutes. They penetrated to the facility's core level. The efficiency was horrifying. The Marines advanced in organized waves, each group knowing they would die but pushing forward until they physically could not continue. Then the next wave would advance over their bodies, moving deeper into the facility. There was no panic, no retreat, just methodical progression toward the objective regardless of cost. Private Jessica Wong was part of the third wave. Zixtara had spoken with her briefly, a young woman who talked about studying engineering before enlisting. Wong's camera feed showed her crawling through a tunnel, bleeding from multiple wounds. She had lost her weapon somewhere behind her. Her armor was breached in several places, compromising life support, but she kept moving forward. Pulling herself along when her legs would no longer support her weight, Wong reached a large chamber, and her suit sensors immediately identified it as the facility's primary distribution center. She triggered her communication system, her voice weak but clear. Command, this is Wong. Found the main power core. Transmitting coordinates now. Webb's voice came back immediately. Confirmed, Wong. Excellent work. Extraction team is en route. Negative on extraction, sir. Wong's breathing was labored. Her suit's medical systems screaming warnings that Zixtara could see on the shared display. I can hear them coming. Lots of them. You need to fire now while the coordinates are clean. There was a pause. Zixtara knew Webb was checking the tactical situation. If they waited for extraction, the Ravagers would overrun Wong's position and possibly destroy the transmitter. The opportunity would be lost. Wong, confirm you understand. We fire now. You're at ground zero. I understand, sir. Wong's camera showed Ravager drones beginning to enter the chamber. She drew a small blade weapon and tried to stand, but her body would not cooperate anymore. It's been an honor serving with you all. The feed cut to static as Webb ordered the orbital bombardment. Zixtara watched on the main tactical display, as weapons from 4 ships fired simultaneously at Wong's coordinates. The mountain shook as kinetic projectiles and plasma charges struck the facility. Secondary explosions rippled through the tunnel system as power conduits. Overloaded and automated systems failed catastrophically when the bombardment stopped. Seismic sensors showed the facility structure had collapsed completely. The Ravager manufacturing complex was destroyed, all drones and automated systems eliminated. The objective was achieved. Total human casualties, 174 out of 180 Marines. 97% dot, and they had won. Zixtara stood in the command center, looking at the casualty list. Names scrolled past, each representing a being who had charged into certain death. Chun, who had lost his leg and kept fighting. Park, who had sacrificed himself to save his squad. Wong, who had called bombardment on her own position. Vasquez, who had died leading the first wave through the entrance tunnels. Captain Webb stood nearby, watching the same list. His face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the railing in front of him hard enough that his knuckles had turned white. "How do you do this?" Ixtara asked quietly. "How do you send your people to die?" Webb was silent for a long moment. "Because someone has to. The Ravagers won't stop. They'll keep consuming, keep building, keep killing. So we do what needs to be done." He finally looked at Zixtara. "You understand now, don't you? Why the elder species didn't want us in the coalition?" "Yes," Zixtara said. "They feared what you would bring to the stars." "We didn't bring war," Webb said quietly. "War was already here. The Ravagers made sure of that. We just brought the knowledge of how to win it, no matter the cost." Zixtara returned to her quarters to write her final report. She had 50 pages of tactical observations, casualty statistics, and strategic analysis, but none of it captured what she had truly witnessed. She deleted everything and started over. Subject: Human Military Assessment. Threat level: critical. The Galactic Council must understand what humanity represents. Humans are not strong, not fast, not naturally armored. Their technology is adequate, but not exceptional. Their lifespans are short. By every conventional measure, they should be insignificant, but humans have spent their entire existence fighting. They evolved as persistent hunters who pursue prey to exhaustion. They developed warfare into an art form through 10,000 years of killing each other. They invented weapons designed to cause maximum death. They built enough weapons to exterminate themselves multiple times. They have something no other species possesses: complete acceptance of death as a tactical option. Humans do not fight to survive. They fight to ensure the enemy loses, even if it costs them everything. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if it advances the objective. They view individual survival as secondary to mission completion. Comments for next.